Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we will learn about grid layout. So far, we have used tables, floats, position properties, and inline block to design and structure our layouts. But all these methods were more like hacks. Flex helped creating layouts, but it's intended for simpler one-dimensional layouts and not complex two-dimension ones. Grid is the very first CSS module created specifically to solve the layout problem. The grid layout offers a grid-based layout system with rows and columns, making it easier to design web pages. Let's try to understand some of the concepts of CSS grid layout. Say we have this grid layout. The parent element needs to have a display value grid, and it is called grid container. And all these elements wrapped inside the container are called grid items. As I mentioned earlier, the grid layout has rows and columns. The vertical lines of grid items are called columns and the horizontal lines of grid items are called rows. If you noticed, there is a space between rows and columns. The gap between rows is called row gap and the space between columns is called column gap. The grid layout gives us control to change the value for both row and column gap. And as the name suggests, the name of the property is row gap, column gap, or if you want to give same value to both, you could use grid gap. The row and column gap represents vertical and horizontal lines. The lines between rows are called row line and the lines between columns are called column lines. Each line has a position. The first row line has a position 1, the next row line has a position 2, and so on. Similarly, the first column line has a position 1, the next column line has a position 2, and so on. These line numbers help us control the row span and column span in our grid layout. In the coming videos, we will learn how to use these concepts to design and structure our layouts. That's all for today, guys. If there is something that you did not understand, feel free to drop a comment and we will discuss it. See you in the next video. Bye and take care. Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we will learn how to modify grid container properties to design responsive layouts. Say we have this list of movie posters, and what we want to do is convert it into this grid, where in each row we have 5 columns for desktop screens, 3 columns for tablets, and 2 columns for mobile screens, like this. Alright, so let's get started. As I mentioned in the previous video, so to make a division grid, we need to use this display grid value. So let's start with that. Let's bring up our code editor here. Alright, so this is the div which wraps all the other items. So we'll have to give display grid to this division. So coming here, so because that was an ID, so hash, let's say display grid. And as you can see, nothing happens. This property is used to tell browser that this div and its children will follow grid layout rules. And giving a div display grid changes nothing by default. But now we have access to all the grid properties. Let's say now we need to define how many columns each row should have. For that, we have this property called grid template columns. Let's use it. Let's say grid template columns. So here we can define the number of columns we are expecting in each row. Let's say we want 4 columns and all these columns should take equal width. Or in other words, say we want 4 columns and I want the entire width to be split equally amongst these 4 columns. So what we can do is we can use a value auto. So this defines split all the available space equally amongst the total number of columns that we define here. So let's say auto again, and auto again. So we have specified this value 4 times. So what this means is define 4 columns in a row and give equal width to all. So let's say that, and now as you can see, we've got 4 columns in a row. Let's try adding some space in between. So as I mentioned earlier in the previous video, we have this property called row gap, column gap, and grid gap. So let's try using those. Let's say grid gap 16 pixels, So there's just now a space of 16 pixels between our rows and columns, or we could say row gap, say 32 pixels. And as you can see here, there's a space of 32 pixels between these two rows. Similarly, let's try increasing the column gap, let's say 48 pixels. And as you can see, the space between these cards is, or these columns is 48 pixels. So let's just bring it back to 16 pixels. Now, what we needed was 5 items in a row. So to make that, what we can do is simply just add one more auto here. Let's save it. And as you can see, we've got 5. Say we needed 6, so we could have one more. And this would give us 6 columns in each row. All right, so let's just bring it back to 5. So right now it's divided equally amongst all the columns. Say we wanted to give specific widths. Say we want the first column to be 300 pixels and second column to be just 100 pixels. Third column to be, say, 250 pixels. Fourth column to be 500 pixels and last column to be 150 pixels. Let's save it. And as you can see, all these different columns have different widths because we've defined different width for these columns. All right, so let's just bring it back to auto for now. So let's say auto, 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 and auto. So we've given 5 autos here, that means 5 columns. All right, so that does the job. Now, and as you can see, the entire grid is spanning across the width. Now let's say we want everything to be in the start. So we could do justified content and say start. Let's save it. And as you can see, nothing changes because we've specified the grid to take the entire width. So for that, let's try changing the width for now. So let's say instead of these autos, let's give them 150 pixels each. So we needed 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's save it. And as you can see, my entire grid is in the start, so towards the left. Similarly, say I wanted everything to be at the end or the right, so I could simply use this value end. Or I wanted my entire grid to be in the center of the screen, so I could just do center. Or let's say we want to utilize this left and right space. So for that, we could do, say, space between. So all the space will be divided equally in between these columns. So as you can see here, or we wanted the space to be around. So in that case, we could do space around. And now we've got space on the left and right side of the grid as well. That's how you can align your grid towards left, right, center, or add space in between or around. All right, so now let's just bring everything back to the way it was. So let's just remove this justify content. And instead of this 150 pixels, let's make it auto. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Let's save it. And as you can see, we've got these 5 columns in each row, or these 5 cards in each row. Now moving on. So what we want is to have just 3 cards for tablet screens and 2 cards just for mobile screens. So for that, we can use media queries. So let's add a media query here. Say media max width, say 900 pixels, and we want to control the number of rows. So let's just copy this for now and paste it here. So this value is going to stay the same, but what we want is we just want 3 columns. So we can remove these extra 2. Let's save it. Let's inspect and try opening it on an iPad. So coming here, and as you can see, we've just got these 3 columns. Similarly, for mobile screens, we just want 2. So we can add another media query. So media max width, say 400 pixels. And let's just copy this. So instead of 3, we just need 2. Let's save it. And let's try changing it to MotoG4. And as you can see, we just got 2 in each row. Or say we just wanted one, so we could remove this also, and we would just have one in each row. And guys, that's how you can use grid and grid properties to design responsive layouts. That's all for today, guys. If there's something that you did not understand, feel free to drop a comment and we will discuss it. See you in the next video. Bye and take care. Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we will learn how to modify grid item related properties to design complex layouts. Say you have to design this layout, so where you've got a header, a sidebar on the left, on the right, a space for some ad, in the center, some space for the main content, and at the bottom, a footer. And on tablet screens, this right add section, it goes below your main and menu. On mobile screens, even the main component comes in the next line after menu. So as you can see, this is a very responsive layout. On different screen sizes, it renders differently. So let's try creating this. Right now what we have is, we have these a couple of divisions with different colors and which represent different part of our web page. When working with complex layouts, the best way is to split your screen width into 12 columns or 6 columns based on the different number of components inside your div. So if you see here, we've got a 1, 2, 3 rows and 1, 2, 3 columns. So I guess we can go with 6. We can't go with 3 or else giving this extra width to some components and giving smaller width to some components would be difficult. So going with 6 makes more sense. So what we're looking at is 6 columns and 3 rows inside the grid. Alright, so coming back here. Alright, let's begin. Let's bring up our code editor. And as you can see here, this division, it wraps all our other components and it has got an ID grid container. So let's add some styles to it. So hash grid container. Let's start by giving it display grid. So display grid. And now to design the structure of entire layout, grid provides us with a property called grid template areas. So here you can specify the exact number of rows and columns and which components will occupy which rows and columns. So let's say grid template areas. And before we could specify rows and columns, we have to give names to all of these components. So for that, grid gives us another property called grid area. So let's say this is header, so header. Similarly, for this we could say sidebar. For this we could call it main. Similarly, for aside, we could call it aside. And for footer, we can call it footer. So now coming here, so to define how many columns are going to come in a row, we have to define 6 different values. So that tells our grid that we are looking at 6 columns. So let's say on the top, we want all the 6 to be taken by header. So we could do something like this. So we've specified header 6 times. So what this does is, it's going to give the entire first row to header. Let's bring it down here. Now, if you see here, so now what we want to do is we want to have this menu on the left and this aside on the right and the content in the middle. So first we can say menu. Then at the end we can have aside, and in between we can add all the main. So we can put 4 main contents here. And after that we just have a footer and we want the footer to take the entire row. So again, just like header, we could do like this. Let's save it. Coming back here. Alright, so it's not working. Let's see what's the issue here. Okay, this looks fine. And coming here. Alright, so the problem is, for this grid area, we've given it some string values, which it doesn't accept. So we don't need to add double quotes or single quotes to our area names. We could simply give it a value, say header or sidebar, without wrapping them in single or double quotes. So if we remove all this and we save it, we see our grid. It's just that the menu item is outside. So let's see what's the issue here. So for menu, the value is sidebar and we've given menu here. So let's just update the value. So coming back, and as you can see, we've got the header, then menu on the left, main in the middle. On the right hand side, we've got a right, and at the bottom, we've got footer. All right. Now, if we open this on a tab screen, so like this, let's say iPad, it still is showing the version that we had on desktop. Now to change it, we can add some media queries. So let's say add the weight media, max width, say 900 pixel. And all we have to do is just update this grid template areas. So as you can see here, so on the tablet screen, the right or the aside element is below main and menu. So we could do that. So instead of putting aside up there, we can give another row to aside. 3, 4, 5, and we've got given all the columns to aside for this row, and we'll have to increase one for main here. Let's save it. And coming back, and as you can see, we've got menu, and on the right hand side we've got main. All right. Similarly, for small mobile screens, what we want is this main to also go in the next row. So for that, we can have another media query. So let's copy this. So max width could be 400 pixels. We're talking about small screen sizes. So in this case, we can just give the entire row to main and add another row before it for the sidebar. Let's save it, and coming up here. And now as you can see, we've got a header, the menu, main, right, and footer, all stacked below each other. And if I change the screen size, let's say iPad, it changes, or if we just remove it, it goes back to the desktop version. So as you can see, this is a pretty responsive web page for different screen sizes. It's showing different components at different positions. Now this might not seem like much. So this is just the structure of a web page. So instead of this header, you can have your entire top bar, a well-designed top bar. On this left-hand side, at the place of the sidebar, you can have some menu items on which click you can update your main content. On this right-hand side or aside, you can have an ad section or some suggestions that you would like to show your users. And of course, at the footer, you can have your footer links. That's all for today, guys. If there is something that you did not understand, feel free to drop a comment and we will discuss it. See you in the next video. Bye and take care.